So recently I was listening to this podcast called 99% Invisible और उसके एक एपिसोड में they were talking about a book called Invisible Women by Caroline Perez. इस किताब में बात की गई है जेंडर बायस इन डिज़ाइन, मतलब कि हमारी दुनिया में कितना ज़्यादा जेंडर बायस है नॉर्मल चीज़ों के डिज़ाइन में. बेसिकली हर चीज़ मर्दों ने डिज़ाइन की है मर्दों के लिए. I'll give you 2 examples from the book. पहला, द कार क्रैश टेस्ट डमीज़. तो कार के क्रैश टेस्ट के लिए जो डमीज इस्तेमाल होते हैं, जो पुतले इस्तेमाल होते हैं, दे आर डिजाइंड फॉर मेल एनाटॉमी एंड नॉट फीमेल एनाटॉमी. एंड द रिजल्ट इज दैट मोर विमेन डाई इन कार क्रैशेस एवरी ईयर, क्योंकि वो जो उन्होंने एनाटॉमी डिजाइन की है और जो सेफ्टी फीचर्स डिजाइन किए हैं, दे आर फॉर अ मेल बॉडी एंड नॉट अ फीमेल बॉडी. सेकेंड एग्जाम्पल इज इवन मोर डेंजरस. What is the first sign of a heart attack? What is the general knowledge about it? A silent heart attack, we all know or we have been told, is जब chest में आपको pain होता है. But the problem is ये मर्दों के लिए पहला sign है. For women, the first sign of a silent heart attack is not pain in the chest, but actually fatigue or pain in the back between the shoulder blades. So पॉइंट इज, दुनिया में हर चीज मर्दों ने मर्दों के लिए डिजाइन की है, औरतों को बिल्कुल इग्नोर कर दिया गया है. बट इज देयर अ वे आउट ऑफ इट? लेट्स ट्राई एंड फाइंड आउट. So since we are talking about systemic violence against women, there is one filmmaker who has constantly brought this conversation into her cinema, right from her first film, Amu, then to Margarita with a Straw, then The Sky is Pink, and recently with Modern Love Mumbai, Raat Rani. Please welcome our guest for today, Shonali Bose. Hello, Shonali.
Hi, Varun. Please.
कैसी हैं आप?
बस बिल्कुल बढ़िया. So delighted to be in a conversation with you on any subject. I said, if it's Varun, I'll do any subject.
Thank you. And unfortunately, it's not a very bright subject. It is slightly grim. We are talking about depiction of violence against women on screen, because you have always made cinema which is very socially conscious and which puts women in the center of it. And I know you actually find it frustrating that why always it has to be a female filmmaker talking about, women and depiction of women. I know it's very
not frustrating, just boring, It's just boring. I'm like, it's coming out of my ears talking about women in cinema as a woman director.
So to begin with, what were your early influences in cinema? I know you were about to get PhD and then you dropped that and then you moved to filmmaking. And so why did you do that? And was there any particular film or were there a series of films you watched which changed your mind or which gave you that idea?
So I'm that rare filmmaker who didn't grow up wanting to be a filmmaker and didn't grow up just watching cinema. Like, not at all. It's just, from school, I grew up in Kolkata, so we were taken, say, Pother Pachali, Satyajit Ray, and you have Satyajit Ray's book right here on the table, is something we were taken to as a class. We also had Pother Pachali as a text. Bimal Roy's Kabuliwala. And if I look back at those two films, like, they have subliminally, subconsciously influenced me deeply. So, but Kabuliwala, watching it in a theatre as a child. So I grew up with watching those, I was much older when I watched Ritik Ghotok, Meghe Dhakatara, but I've watched this kind of cinema. And whatever was there in Doordarshan, I grew up in the 1970s, what was being showing, and a lot of Bengali cinema actually as a result, because I was in Kolkata. It's my activism that then led me. So I went to do my PhD in political science. I was writing, say, a paper on Telangana movement or Naxalbari, where I'm looking at, I was in History Honours Miranda House. History Honours Miranda House department is the kind of department when genocide against Sikhs happened, head of history, Uma Chakravarti, takes us out to the camps. It's living history. We documented what happened, and that is who we are. We are activists, and that is why my first film is on that. Everybody knows that who's going on watching cinema, but I'm not coming from a cinema point of view. You see, I was just that I'm an activist. I'm going to be a teacher and an activist. That's what I thought I wanted to do in life. Yeah. But then I found this, and I was like, oh, okay, let me try this out. But again, not from how anybody else is just like, cinema, I'm just like, try
But you were still interested in telling stories because you are telling stories.
Maybe, I don't know, because I was like, try karte. So I applied to film schools, and again, only because I got a full scholarship to UCLA Film School, that I was like, okay, and at that point, I was now in huge activism. I was living in Toronto, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going. And my husband, Bedo Protopain, I'm divorced right now, but at that time, he said, just give it a shot for one semester. You know, you thought you wanted to do it, you should. So that was very wise on his part. I don't know wise or not, because then he also ended up being a filmmaker and, you know.
Yeah, at that time he was also not.
He was a NASA scientist. And so then I came, and the first month you make your first film on 16mm. So it was 16mm film. It was a 2-minute film, again on some activisty thing. And I was like, this is my calling. I just felt it in my body and mind to direct, to write a story and to direct it and to bring to life something that I cared about, something that I wanted to impact an audience with. I was like, this is my calling. So, but I was 29 at that point. It took me that much time.
While you were saying, well, Amu is more like an activist film, Margarita with the Straw doesn't look like an activist film. So how did you make that transition from, I would say, okay, from an activist filmmaker to a narrative filmmaker?
So I would hope that some circles will still see that as an activist film, because it's taking up in a big way sexuality and disability. But yes, it's a very personal film. Actually, Amu is also very personal for me. It's just that it's such an overt theme, genocide, right? That's why it's, you know, and I'm really proud of it as being my most political film overtly. So for this, it's very personal, because anyway, it was inspired by my sister Malini, who has acute cerebral palsy. So I've grown up with that. So it's anyway very personal. I myself am bisexual, so I, you know, brought that in. So I wrote from a personal space, but I must tell you that so did I write from a personal space with Amu, which is why of all stories, why I chose a mother-daughter story, is because in Miranda House, I suffered 2 tragedies. One is the big political tragedy where you really felt it by being in the camps and comforting people who'd lost somebody, and I had never lost anybody. And 2 years later, my mother died of medical negligence in Bombay. And so when I started writing Amu, the 2 things just with, actually subconsciously, I didn't realize it till my head of department of history again of MH, Uma Chakravarti commented, she said, you know, the personal and political was so going hand in hand in Miranda House for you that you actually wrote of any story you could write. You wrote about parental loss. You wrote about maternal loss. Because the mother, like that was an unusual story to take of 84. Where in this case, she committed suicide, but the mother, you know, leaves, you know, the child is left without the mother. And then there's a beautiful, and that's my Mashi Brinda, you know, my mother's sister who I decided to cast in it. But I feel that was personal too. But here, Margarita with the Straw is very deeply personal because it's really from my family story.
What was the biggest, this thing? They were saying it is a political film or it's a film with a female protagonist?
So interestingly on that actually, so firstly, overtly political films, say even private investors in Canada, US, UK, like Sikhs who I would approach, they were ready to fund Golden Temple, anything if I did on Golden Temple, but not 84. Okay. You know, 84 is something they actually also wanted buried. But at one point I did meet a sort of a producer, not with a production house or studio, it was still where there were producers who can just, you know, give you some money and that guy said, you make him a hero. I'll fund the whole film.
Yeah, I can imagine that, yeah. Yeah, people just have this weird thing.
And imagine, I want to make a film. So this is interesting for me when I look back on myself, because I so wanted to make on this political issue. So if I look back on it, where at that moment, I don't know I'll find that money, right? Looking back, I did. But I was like, I was so outraged by that concept that you change the boy into a girl and then you can make a film. I was like, over my dead body, there's just no way. The story would still stand actually if it was a guy, right? But I just found it as so shocking that you will tell me, I will pay for your film if it's a hero-led and not a female-led, that I just could not accept that. Yeah. And it would have been so easy because it was so hard making it after that to find that in individual money. He wasn't funding the whole thing. But I could not accept that to change it. So yeah, I did face that. It's so interesting.
So you have shot intimacy and you have shot violence on screen. Which one you find more difficult to shoot?
So do you mean because of Amu? Because the way I shot violence was intimate. I made a decision that I am not going to show you because you're so anesthetized to watch violence in watching the news and everything that I don't need to show you people on fire or any kind of thing like that. I chose to show a close-up of the little girl's face, which we're very conscious that she is seeing her father on fire. And the power of imagination is so much stronger that you are forced to understand what is she looking at. And I feel that was an intimate choice I made on how to depict violence. And I feel it's a female choice I made. I definitely feel so that it's much more even politically powerful and important that I show you the impact this violence is having. So I feel that's a very conscious choice of how to show violence, which is gendered. Intimate scenes are really hard. With anything which is to do with action, say a riot or a mob, action, anything to do with action or anything to do with scale, you know, it's just getting the right equipment, you know, getting the right, you know, no issue whatsoever. An intimate scene, you have to get it right. You have to get the honesty right, right? So doesn't matter how many workshops you did, and I had a lot of intimacy workshops with both Kalki and Shayoni for Margarita with a Straw. At that time when you're shooting, if any self-consciousness comes in, which, you know, then like it's so close, the camera, and how your every breath and everything is important. Like you have to just get that. And so the work with the actors is so important. Much harder to pull off than showing anything which is action. And this is something I also face as a woman, which I dislike and feel irritated by, that so for me, the kind of films I'm offered, I'll never be offered a male action film. I'll always only be offered emotional drama. So I may excel at emotional drama, but it's nonsense to think I can't do the other. It's much harder the other way around. And I'm specifically saying this in the context that just 3 weeks ago, I really pitched myself hard for one show, which is at one of the major OTTs, which has big scale and violence. But I'm interested in it because there's also politics in it. It's to do with the hijacking of an aircraft, very well known. And they wanted, there's just no way they'll consider me. And they chose a male director. I love his work, but I know that person's films and doesn't have more skill than mine. But because maybe he's a man, there's that notion. And because of I've done intimate work. So I just can't bear that kind of sexism. That's outrightly sexist, to think that I can't do that. It's like when you have a dance sequence, you have a choreographer. You don't need to know the dance steps as a director. Same with action, right? Give me the tools. So now I'm like, I'm going to have to do a male action film that I write myself, or you will write me. We will do a political male action thriller.
And again, you'll have to fund it yourself.
I'll fund it myself. If you write for me, Varun, I'll fund it myself.
My, a secondary question to that was, why do you think people find seeing violence on screen easier than seeing intimacy on screen?
We are inured to violence because we're seeing it all the time, right, on the media. That's number one. And number two, we are this moralistic country where you can't even kiss in real life, you know, in a public space, right? So intimacy is not allowed in public spaces, so you don't see it, right? Even in a family, like it's just so weird. Why can't we have people, you know, kissing? It's so wonderful to kiss and hug and, you know, have, you know, intimacy in parks and spaces. Oh my God. Today we know there'll be a brigade against you and arresting you, right? Yeah. So this is why I think we're uncomfortable seeing it on screen too. Whereas violence is increased, you know, 1,000-fold, both in media and in front of our eyes, like brutally, right? So you're inured to it. You're used to watching it.
So do you think that how then cinema should respond to this? Like next time, if we want to, for example, show a scene of a lynching in a film, do you think it has to be a certain way for people to take note of it? So what's...
No, I have a very clear position on this, and it's exactly what I did in Ammu. And I just feel that, and I have the same position on rape. So I would not want to see a woman be raped on screen. I don't want to see somebody being lynched or anything like that happening. I did not feel in Ammu that I need to show you somebody put on fire. I need to show you the impact of that. So how can you not feel like pain if you're watching somebody be lynched, but you're hearing it? So you do brilliant sound design and off-screen sound. So you're not spared the pain. You're having to go through the gritty experience, but it is through the protagonist or whoever the character. You have to be in a cinema, narrative cinema, really connected with the character who's having to view that or is going to be impacted by that. And you're feeling then. See, in watching that lynching, which we're anyway seeing on media, then what is there? But if you're feeling it through somebody's eyes and you're hearing it, the unbearableness of it, that is much stronger. And that is much more responsible and it's much more effective. Certainly where rape is concerned, I'm like out of the question. This is a complete old way of thinking that we need to show you rape to sensitize you to it. No.
There is the kind of glorified violence we see in our cinema and a lot of these vigilante cop films we have, or generally just the crime drama, which is like the most favorite genre of television right now. Do you see some of it, or do you think there are some people who are doing it responsibly, or have you seen anything?
No, so like say Patal Lok I watched and I really liked Patal Lok. I thought it was an extremely well done series and aesthetic and everything. So there were scenes of violence in that. I'm in general a little bit squeamish about it, but when something is so well done in every aspect of the craft, of how it was written, how it was directed, how it was acted, then I'm with the characters, with the story. So it's not at all being, just superficially glorified for the sake of it. It's working with the story. Then, it's fine for me. So I do feel it's really, I can't just give a broad answer. It would depend on why you're showing it and, what's the need. What's your reason? Because if you push any producer, director, writer, and you get that answer, then you would also know that actually why they're showing it, right?
So there's this debate about whether men should write about women, whether women should or can write about men in an authentic manner. Or let's say Savarna Hindu can write about a Dalit experience or not. So where do you stand on that?
No, I don't agree on that at all. I feel like anybody can write on anything. It's about your sensitivity and empathy. You would write a brilliant, I don't know all of your works, but I'm sure you'd write an outstanding woman's thing. Raat Rani is fully written by Nilesh Maniyar. It's my most feminist film. I had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it other than directing. I didn't contribute to making such a fascinating three-dimensional character who's so feisty and amazing. That's a man. And patriarchy is an ideology. I feel also it comes from just why shouldn't I make her a girl? Why should she be a boy has sort of more been the reason that's guided. I've not done that many films. So, but the fact that I do have one completely male film where there's a very small role for a woman, which is Chittagong. That is as a writer, and I was going to direct it. So that is an example. And as I said, Raat Rani being the reverse, where it's a completely feminist film written by a man. And I love that.
We have a small round called What If, which is just hypothetical scenarios. You have to react to them. How would you carry your worldview or your politics in, let's say, in a violent genre like a Western or a slasher flick? Can you imagine making a slasher kind of or a horror film with your politics intact?
Definitely. I feel I'm genre agnostic. I love any genre. And there's a horror film I'm developing with somebody. I feel you have to look for opportunities to insert your politics, especially in today's India, any and every opportunity you get, subtly. So whether it's simple politics of gender, sexuality, where do you place, say in Raat Rani that Nilesh decided that the employers make them lesbian. Naturally, normally somebody would just make them heterosexual, but here's an opportunity, you just make them, whether people get it or not. So whether on caste, class, those things, But I feel even on little political satire and inserting little commentary here, there, it's much more exciting for me if I take a genre where it's not supposed to exist and you can play with that and just sort of figure out how subtly you can put those things in. That's what's exciting for me, and therefore I would really want to, I would take my politics to those genres and I would do something, I would subvert it, but not in a way that's obvious to just a general audience, but I would subvert it.
Do you think our cinema would have been different if our first film was made by a woman instead of a man? Or the first few films or first 20, 30 years were dominated by women directors and women makers?
Maybe, but I think that, we had the changes that, because I feel like the 50s and 60s, 70s, women. 50s, there were lovely male filmmakers who really were sensitive about women. So, as I said, it's an ideology. So I'm not a person who thinks that, because you can have really hideous things about women that women are doing. So it's really the politics at the time and how progressive is somebody and how, their outlook is. But yes, the fact that women in our mainstream cinema have always been ornamental, like just secondary to the story, secondary to everything, you're right. I do feel if there were women directors, they would at least have equal billing, if not be more their story. Yeah, I do feel that, yes. Yes. If women were the directors and producers and writers, I hope to say that that would be different.
Good female directors not only write better female characters, but better male characters also. More sensitive men, the kind of men we don't generally see in these heavy, male-oriented films. A lot of them are one-dimensional kind of the idea of man, which is the stereotypical idea of men.
So this is a really important point, Varun, if I may just add something. What you've said, a very profound point, because to change, we don't only need to show how women are empowered, but you need to show the change where men like you, we should see like that, right? So in Margarita with the Straw, we did that with the father, that we made a father who's happy to take the second seat. Like he doesn't have to be the one at the head of the table. Like literally she's driving the family, she's driving the car. And that's really important to show. But fascinatingly, like it was with, anyway, at Goa Film Festival, there was some, bunch of foreigners and all. I was in some critical thing. And I was appalled that they felt that, this is not what the majority of Indian men are like. So why have you made this kind of father? This is Europeans saying that. But I was like, but my father's like this and my uncles are like this and I know a bunch of men like this, so shouldn't you show the change? Why does it have to be that you have to just show what's the majority? And while Europe and America wants to see just the patriarchal, like loud, domineering man who's oppressing the woman, why can't you show a feminized, soft man? Yeah. It was interesting to me that film festival type people are like, no, why you shouldn't have done that. Which I think is a very important point you just made.
Yeah, and also
right, progressive men.
Yeah, and it is cinema's power also and responsibility also, because it has power to create aspirational characters. You want to be the kind of man who can cry easily, or who is sensitive, or who is empathetic, who is politically aware, instead of a typical, the Devdas stereotype which we have in Indian cinema, which is simply, वो सिर्फ एक ही एजेंडा है उसका लाइफ में कि how he is a victim of circumstances, whether it is the system oppressing him, और लड़की छोड़ के चली गई है, या उसका बाप उसको समझता नहीं है, या दुनिया उसको नहीं समझती है, या उसको ऑमलेट बनाना नहीं आता है. Whatever is the idea for that filmmaker, for that age. But that is one stereotype we have, and that is persisting throughout, and that I think it is the job of cinema to create a different kind of male aspirational figure. Ki, okay, this is also something which can be attractive, and which can be, we can be that person, instead of this whiny, crying, angry about everything, and mostly about entitlement, कि हाँ ये मुझे मिलना ही चाहिए था और नहीं मिला है. So that is, I think that is, of course, the job of, or should be one of the responsibilities of cinema, and you have been doing it so well. So thank you for that, and thank you for having this conversation with us today. It was lovely, lovely, lovely listening to your thoughts and your process. So we will hopefully do it again, and we will hopefully see more of you on screen and telling more new stories you want to tell, and not the stories people want you to tell.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Varun. Thank you so much
having this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks. So lovely talking.